Ladies and gentlemen, let's read Gamer Telecom video. An increase in the Xbox One's GPU performance is on the horizon. It's actually been confirmed by Microsoft that the Xbox One's GPU will have an additional 10% of performance available to developers because Kinect reserves are going to be accessible for games developers should they choose to do it. Now, I'm doing this as an article as well because there are quite long, lengthy quotes that I could be giving. In addition to that, there are a couple of sources and also some facts and figures. But I just want to make this video fairly brief and to give you the key points, as so it were. So you might remember a couple of days ago there was a tweet from Phil Spencer. He said that, and I quote, June hashtag Xbox One software dev kits give developers more GPU bandwidth, performance, new tools and flexibility to make games better. But there wasn't really that much information regarding how they were going to be doing this, what the causes and effects were going to be, and so on and so forth. And since then, Microsoft have issued a couple of statements. Now, some of these statements are fairly lengthy and, to be honest, have lots of PR. I've got the whole quotes in the article, but I'm not going to read them all out simply because a lot of it's just saying, you know, they're going to be helping developers and so on, and that's fairly obvious anyway, so there's no need for me to read all of that out. Let's just be honest. So, the core parts of this are, in June, we are releasing a new SDK making it possible for developers to access additional GPU resources previously reserved for Kinect and system functionalities. And with this SDK, we will include new options for developers to use the system reserve as more flexibility in our natural user interface reserve, voice and gesture. Then, Microsoft were asked by Eurogamer if the Kinect was the reason behind this, despite the fact that they were told, but this is the key number. The additional resources allow access up to 10% additional GPU performance, but they say that they're still kind of not 100% ready to announce all of this, however. But they did point out that for consumers, simply unplugging the Kinect will not impact the performance of the Xbox One. The June SDK released to developers gives them access to the additional performance, and accessing the additional GPU resources is down to the developers, and it's up to them, pretty much. And they also pointed out, might I add, that if titles ship in the future, if a developer has taken advantage of this SDK change, they may access this additional GPU resource. We have started to work with a number of developers how they can best take advantage of it, and so on and so forth. In other words, it starts to go very PR-y there. You know, the normal, we're going to work with the developers as best we can, which is fairly obvious. Any studios, or any development company working on hardware, of course, is going to do the same thing, so it's normal to be expected, so nothing particularly interesting. So, there are several really key points here that we can basically know how this is going to work. And I pointed out that this was the most likely workflow anyway, but likely and is pretty much confirmed are two different things. Obviously, they're probably still addressing a couple of key points, but what we can take away from this, firstly, there is no off and on switch. So you're not going to have to go to the dashboard, you're not going to have to press a button and say, I wish to disable Kinect, right, for my game to run faster. Similarly, if you have Kinect plugged in, you're not going to run the game slower. It's pretty simple. This means this is not going to be an example of like the old Sega Saturn games where there was like a 1 megabyte or even a 4 megabyte RAM card you plug in, and games like, for example, Marvel Superheroes would load up with additional animation, better sprites, whatever, because it had that additional memory. No, this isn't going to be like that. It's down for the developers to set this themselves. The other point, this one's fairly key as well, it will not most likely impact titles that have already been released unless the developer decides to update them, and how likely they are to update them really depends on how easy this is to access the reserve. Theoretically, and this is without knowledge really of like how their SDKs work in the background and how obviously they're implemented with the engine, and obviously each developer is going to be different with how their engine particularly works and what they've done with the memory bandwidth and so on. But this basically means that unless the title gets an update, it's not suddenly going to run faster, and more to the point, it's going to run exactly how it was, even if it didn't use Kinect. So in other words, if you put Titanfall in your machine, it's going to run and function exactly the same. You're going to be able to access Kinect functionality exactly the same. However, if Respawn decide 2 years down the line to release Titanfall 2 on the Xbox One and all the other systems, whatever, then the Xbox One version could theoretically not make use of Kinect, could utilize this extra performance, and therefore, yay, shiny, better graphics, or better frame rate, or better effects, or whatever the developers decide to utilize the extra performance for. So I'm going to give a couple of other key points on this. That's basically how it works. There are a couple of other key points. Now, regarding the memory bandwidth, as far as I could tell, what they're referring to here is it's likely 10% additional memory bandwidth, but you're not really getting additional bandwidth in terms of a ratio. What this is most likely referring to is that they're going to get the reserve that was, let's say, the Xbox One's GPU memory bandwidth. Let's just make it easy, actually. Let's just use arbitrary figures. It doesn't really matter. Let's just say the Xbox One's memory bandwidth is 10, right? It's nowhere near that. It's considerably higher. But let's just say the GPU memory bandwidth is 10 because we've got an easy figure. So 10% of that is reserved for 10% of the Xbox One's GPU is reserved for Kinect. So that logically would mean 10% of the bandwidth is also reserved. So in effect, 9 memory bandwidth is available for graphics and gameplay, and 9 of the 10 GPU is reserved for is available for games. So because this ratio continues, yes, you're going to get additional memory bandwidth, but this additional memory bandwidth is being offset by the fact that you've got extra GPU performance. So in effect, if a game or the architecture is still memory bandwidth starved, it's still going to remain the same. Finally, this does mean that we're going to be getting quite considerable amount of extra performance. 10% may not seem that much, and yes, if you really want to boil it down, I've done much more of this on the article, but let's just be honest, 10% doesn't sound super amounts. Like, for example, 10% of 30 equals 3. So if a game is running at 30 frames a second, obviously, this depends on the scene and so on, but let's just say it was averaging 30 frames a second, then it could possibly average 32, 33, 34 maybe. It's certainly not going to double it, because obviously doubling the frame rate to 60 would mean that each frame would require half the amount of GPU time to render. But what it does mean, when you think of it this way, the Xbox One's GPU puts out about 1.32 teraflops of computing power, whereas only about, rounding it up, 1.2 has been available for the developers. Now, we're going to be seeing about 120 G-flops, rounded up, available additional bandwidth, which, to put it into perspective, is around half of what the Xbox 360's GPU could put out. That was around 240, 250 G-flops. I've heard different figures bounded about, but the most common was between 240, 250. So if you think about it, it basically means you're going to be getting quite a substantial increase in performance. Now, of course, to be fair, this also means, while it's not going to have exact parity with the PlayStation 4, it will mean better graphics, better gameplay, and just an overall extra control for the developers. And that's what I think this is all about. I have pointed out that I feel in one respect this could be bad for the Xbox One, as weird as that sounds, simply because it means that a lot of AAA developers are just going to say, I want this extra performance. If you're creating a graphically demanding game, you're going to want to use it. On the other hand, I feel that Microsoft didn't really have a choice, because I imagine they were getting some pressure from developers anyway. There was, if I were Electronic Arts or I were a developer and I saw that extra 10% that I couldn't even touch, and my game was like, I don't know, I was going to say Mass Effect, but that actually could be kind of cool with some Kinect type of controls. Let's say Battlefield 4 or whatever. I'd actually be pretty pissed if this, extra performance could actually help me optimize the game that little bit more. Well, maybe not pissed, but I'd really want it. Let's put it that way. And so I feel that while this isn't necessarily 100% good for those of you who love Kinect, because theoretically it could mean that some of your beloved functionality is just not simply accessible while you're playing certain games, for the good of the Xbox One, the Xbox One's ecosystem, and for the games of the future, which is really what this is all about, I feel it was the best decision Microsoft could have made. Anyway, as I said, if you want more information, more analysis type thing, you can go to the article, but that's about it for this particular video, I feel. I'll see you soon, take care, and bye for now.